Just angle this. Yeah, there we go. See how it goes. Let's see how it goes, Nathan. Let's see how it goes. I think the average time's 2 to 4 minutes. Ooh, it's hot. Oh, free. Hello, JX. That was quick. Good evening. Hope you're well too. Thank you. I'm okay. I'm using my smaller laptop, so the quality may not be ideal, but I'm okay. Multitasking here on the dishes, so. How are you? Well, how's your week been? Or I should say, how are you? How's your week been? So JX, you know how this goes. Usually wait for a few people, see if we could get some topics going. It's been a while since I've done one of these, so I thought it was about time. Called to stream early, yeah. I think this is one of the earliest entries so far. I was just thinking the average time's about 4 minutes before someone, well, 3 to 4 minutes before someone comes in, so I'm impressed. I try to do these periodically. Thomas, welcome. Hi Nathan, hope you're okay. What's your reflection on the death of Alex Salmond? Obviously, someone we both strongly disagreed with. Yeah, that's a good question. So, firstly, apparently he died in an unusual circumstance. So he was at this meeting in North Macedonia. Don't know what it was about, but Tasmina Sheikh, I think that's her name. She's another senior Scottish nationalist. Apparently, she had a bottle of ketchup. I'm not making this up. I literally read this. She couldn't open it, and she passed it to Salmond, and he tried opening it, and I assume he had a heart attack. 69 is not that old, so I don't know if he had some pre-existing condition or what, but yeah. Yeah, I think this is always a thing, when someone dies, it's always a question of balance because, balance in terms of the response. I didn't like the man, and I think it would be crying crocodile tears to pretend that I did. But one of the unionist groups I support, I think they had a very balanced response. They passed the condolences to his family, but they didn't skirt around the fact that there were strong differences. For me, obviously, the thing was he was the figurehead of Scottish nationalism. If he had got his way, this country would have been broken up. That's no small thing. I was in Edinburgh on referendum day in 2014. So, Salmond, I'll say this for him purely from a political perspective, he was important in the sense that he brought the SNP to being something of a fringe party to being in government. And I think the record's been pretty awful, but nevertheless, he elevated them into government. They've been in the Scottish executive since 2007. So that was an achievement from their perspective. I don't mean, obviously, from a union's perspective. It's not a good thing, but within the realms of Scotland, put it this way, if I was a Scottish nationalist, I would hold Salmond in high regard in that sense. But of course, as we saw, he had the big fallout with Sturgeon, and he formed his Alba party, which I think has some sectarian tones. I think it's actually quite, there is sectarian tones in that fringe of Scottish nationalism. The SNP, as much as I don't like it, it's a bit more mainstream. But for me, the real issue with Salmond was his pandering to Russia. The Alex Salmond show on Russia Today, I think that was unforgivable. I think that's something that Western politicians should absolutely stay clear of. Sturgeon, to be fair to her, at least she has her radar right when it comes to Russia. So yeah, in terms of what's my thoughts on his death, I won't cry crocodile tears. I won't pretend I'm sad, but obviously a death is a death. It's hard for his family, so yeah, that's basically my take on it. But I did get the Times for his obituary. I will say this: he was an important political figure, because had he achieved what he set out to do, it would have been. I mean, we can't put in words how big a thing that would be. Much bigger than Brexit. If the United Kingdom broke up, that would just be really, for everyone on these islands. It would be a massive, massive thing, I believe, because we'd be going from the United Kingdom to a series of much smaller countries, and it just, yeah. So I'm very pleased that the referendum went the way it did, with Better Together, and as we know, that was a result. But I always point out when Scottish nationalists talk about democracy, more Scots actually voted to stay in the United Kingdom in 2014 than stay in the European Union in 2016, and I voted to stay in the EU. But it's a bit rich to talk about democracy when they've disregarded the results of 2014. But anyway, that's that. Alon, welcome. Do you think alpha male influencers and radical feminists are both making problems for incels worse? That's a good question. I made a video recently on incels. I don't know if you saw it. Sorry, I've just been focusing on this one cup for the past 5 minutes. So yeah, absolutely. Because both put pressure on young men. So from the radical feminist perspective, men are the enemy. It's always about male shaming. It's always about the patriarchy, and we know this. We know the script. The whole masculinist thing's a little bit more of a recent phenomenon, partly a response to feminism. But the likes of Andrew Tate, what is it they put out there? They put out the narrative that the only way to be a strong man is to be this flash sort of materialistic character. You've got so many Ferraris, or it's this very macho image, and it's not a healthy macho image. It's not like what I would consider to be positive masculinity. I mean, I don't like the term toxic masculinity because I think it disregards all masculinity, and I think feminists would do well to remember that when it comes to situations of danger, I mean, let's face it, if a country was invaded, it's uniquely put on men to step up and defend their country. Women do it as well, but there isn't the same expectation. It's a different context. So yeah, to answer the question, I do think they're making problems for incels worse. I've always said, I think one thing I mentioned in that incel video was that, particularly in Western culture, we get this thing of let's laugh at the virgin. So virginity is deemed to be something to ridicule and mock. And you can imagine the situation if there's a young guy and he's going out with a group of so-called friends, and they're always boasting about how much they've scored with girls, and he hasn't had sexual experience. He's going to feel lonely and polarized and bitter. And I think that sort of mocking thing, like we hear sometimes these memes or these incel virgins and stuff, I think they should be condemned for the misogyny, but I do think that Western culture doesn't help. And like I said in that video, they're gravitating to the wrong thing. They're gravitating to the likes of Andrew Tate and others. They need to know that the problems they're facing aren't the fault of women. But having said that, radical feminists and those who disregard men's issues do not help. So, for example, I've had this debate a few times when, feminists will say, oh, but that's not the dictionary definition. It just means equality for women and girls. But the same people simultaneously go on to, whenever anyone suggests, for example, a minister for men in the government, they'll say, oh, but men already have all the attention. It's a patriarchy. So they disregard any attempt to bring attention to men's issues. For example, higher suicide rates, higher workplace accident mortality, that sort of thing. So it's a good question, Alon. Yeah, I think both are a problem, and I think I reflected that in that video. Hi, Declan. Welcome. Don't know why, but watching Fred's 1984 on iPlayer, I saw this was brought out. It's only like the third or fourth time it's been screened. It's pretty striking film. I actually have it on DVD. I don't know where I got it. It must have been secondhand, but it's definitely quite striking. Obviously made the end of the Cold War, but still at a time when nuclear war was a real fear. So yeah. Do you think Harris has collapsed? No, but I don't think the Democrats should be complacent. I watched an ad from the Lincoln Project about an hour ago. If you don't know, the Lincoln Project is a Republican group that are vociferously anti-Trump. They think he's a real danger, and as such, they're campaigning for Harris. But they are a traditional Republican group, hence the name, the Lincoln Project, because they argue that Trump has moved the party away from Abraham Lincoln's Republicans. Um, I don't think she's collapsed. I think if I were the Harris campaign managers, I'd be saying you need to go to Arizona and make a big speech on immigration. Um, I think I won't say it's too early to say it's a mistake, and I think the Democrats are right to talk about this. But I do think that just talking about Trump being a threat to democracy, the excesses of Trump isn't enough to win the presidency. I think they also Harris probably does need to do more to lay out her policy areas rather than just talking about hope and talk about how awful Trump is. But I wouldn't go so far to say as that her campaign has collapsed. She is leading in some of the swing states. Trump's leading in the others. I and I do think that the polls are it's risky to rely on them. I certainly wouldn't say her campaign has collapsed, but I know there was a lot of stuff about that Fox interview. I didn't watch it. I've heard it wasn't great. But she'd already won over a lot of Republicans, so I really don't think it will damage her campaign that much. Of course, Trump voters will say, "Oh, it's terrible" and so on, but I haven't seen many Democrats going over to the Trump campaign. I have seen Republicans going over to the Harris campaign, so it's too early to say. But I mean, frankly, it'll be too early to say an hour before the ballot opens on election night. Not the ballot, the roll call. So not the roll call. What's the word I'm looking for? When the networks start calling state by state. I honestly think I just disregard polls now because they're just inconsistent and unreliable. King of America 97. Protestantism, of course, is much more about individualism and less about theology compared to Catholicism and Orthodoxy. Interesting statement. I'm not sure quite what that's in context, though, with. Is that related to another comment? Sorry, maybe I missed something. I think it's a very important film to watch. I agree, Declan. I will say, though, I don't actually think nuclear war is a very high possibility. As unstable as the world might seem right now, I think even Putin, even Xi Jinping, and even Trump, if he gets back, I don't think we'll actually see a nuclear war. Because, I mean, there has been speculation that the Russians, for example, would actually bank on taking out not a European city, but perhaps some military installation or something. Certainly in recent years, we've seen a dangerous tendency for escalation. I'd say the last couple of years, particularly in Ukraine, there was fighting around the power plant at Zaporizhia. In the Near East, we've seen this tit for tat violence between Israel and Iran. So I think the world is in a difficult spot right now, more than usual, but I don't really fear outright nuclear war. I know the man who won the Nobel Peace Prize, or the group, I should say, they were survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And he, during his tearful acceptance speech in Oslo, said it should be for the people of Gaza. So we can read into that whatever way we will. But let's see here. I think it's very important. Previous one, yes. I'm sorry, King of America. I may have missed a comment because I don't think we were talking about religion, unless we were. I'm sorry, I may have missed something there. Let's see. Steve Davies, welcome. I'm okay, thank you. An accommodation-based place near me, housing 16 to 23-year-olds just to allow them to smoke weed all day and do nothing with their lives. Almost everyone is on the dole. What's your view on this? Okay, so I'd obviously need to know more about what that is. Is it like is it a YMCA or something? Is that, or it's I'll just read that again. Accommodation based near me, housing 16 to 23-year-olds. So that's young people. So it's a particular demographic. It's housing. Well, weed. I mean, I'm not. I'd be careful with any drug. I broadly in favor of legalizing marijuana for medicinal purposes, and I don't think people should go to jail for personal drug use, but it's been linked to schizophrenia. But anyway, this isn't a drug debate. In terms of the situation, yeah, it isn't good. I mean, today, I was leaving my local shopping center, and two teenage girls came out and they just threw trash on the ground, rubbish. I just said to them, I said, "Look, there's a bin just there." No, actually, I started off saying, "Oh, you dropped something," and she said, "Oh, I know." I said, "Well, there's a bin just there," and she said, "Oh, if you care so much, you pick it up." And it's just this selfish, entitled attitude a lot of young people have nowadays. But in terms of the welfare system, I'd be a little bit cautious there because I've been through it, and it's not black and white. It's certainly not as black and white as some conservatives think, because there's a sanction culture in the DWP. So claimants sometimes get sanctioned when they've done nothing wrong, when there's been administrative error. But certainly, I think I will say though, often young offenders will complain there's nothing to do. Well, I think that's a sloppy excuse for crime. So, is there, like, I don't know where you live, Steve, but is there a big problem with antisocial behavior there? You've touched a bit on smoking weed, but is there actually, like, is there, for example, teenage joyriders? Does it feel like an unsafe environment? Because being on the dole is not criminal in itself. So I'm just wondering, is there more to that? Is there more, like, where you live? Is there a problem with antisocial behavior? YMCA light, right? Yeah, I mean, there's a YMCA about 5 minutes from here, 10 minutes from here, and I do feel a little bit intimidated going past it sometimes because probably a very similar thing. Young people hanging about outside. Sometimes they get mouthy, and I've been challenged once or twice, and it's unpleasant. Um, But these are not black and white issues. The homeless thing, for example, is certainly not an easy thing to solve. As for welfare, I've made my views on the DWP clear in other videos. I certainly don't think people should have it as a lifestyle choice, but I do think it's important to have a safety net there. And I think that, there's been a lot of disinformation, or rather distortion, from right-wing outlets about this, because it sort of portrays like people on welfare as all being lazy dole scroungers. The reality is not that simple. A lot of people don't want to sign on precisely because of the stigma. And contrary to free money, there's actually a lot of strict obligations. So it's a big misconception that they just get free money. I would point that out, except perhaps in some cases where there's certain, I mean, there's different types of welfare. It depends what particular thing they're on. Let's see here. It was about virginity. You were talking about incels. Oh, sorry, I missed that, King of America. So it's related to that. I was saying I think it's more taboo in Protestant society. A lot of American and English culture is influenced by it. I see. I'm sorry, I missed that point. So yeah, we were also talking about the influence of radical feminism and masculist types, like yeah, that issue. I think that's what. I'm sorry, I forgot who asked that question. I need to scroll back. This has been a good live stream so far. A lot of comments, a lot of participation, which is always good. I'm just going back to see who raised that question. Let's see, Alon. Yeah, I don't know if Alon's still here, but he raised a question. Do you think alpha male influencers and radical feminists are both making problems for incels worse? So you were replying to that, King of America, regarding the differences in religious outlooks. I'm not thinking so much about that. I was saying I think it's more taboo in Protestant society. I guess it depends if people are religious or not. I mean, in Britain, we have much fewer churchgoers than America, but England is Protestant. It's an Anglican church is the predominant church here. A lot of American and English cultures influence it, but I think it's broader though. I think in popular culture, there's a lot of pressure on young people over sex, basically. I mean, if we look at, virginity as a point of humor, look at that film, The 40-Year-Old Virgin. There is a stigma in Western society if someone is a virgin. And I'm not talking about people who are virgins for faith reasons, i.e., because they believe they don't want to have sexual intimacy before marriage. I'm talking about they simply don't have the opportunities. So maybe they don't have much of a social life, so they don't have an opportunity to meet girls. There's things like that. I'm not thinking so much about people who are voluntarily, because this is a thing about the word incel. The thing about the incel subculture, those aren't guys who are virgins by choice. They just don't have the opportunities, or they're introverted. They're misogynistic, actually. It certainly doesn't help. But I agree with Fallon. I think there's pressures from both radical feminists, but also alpha male influencers. And also, frankly, there's, how can I put it, this like frat boy culture where there's this, we get it in Britain as well, although we wouldn't call it that. It's like, I guess we could say Jack the Lad culture. I remember when I was in school and in my sixth form, there really was a thing there about, it was an all male sixth form. So, the big stigma was, oh, who's gay? And it was a big joke. A good friend of mine is gay, and he used to always get like, oh, what's your asses, guys, and stuff when he was walking behind them. And he's not that sort of person. But there is definitely much more pressure regarding sex in the West than there would be in, say, some Arabic countries, except the pressure there is different. It's like a repressed thing. It's almost like two extremes, I would say. It gets controversial because the staff allow them to verbally abuse them, climb on the roof, and they actively are welcome to walk into the back office seeing all the files. More about antisocial behaviour and no drive to improve the lives. Yeah, I mean, that is, I hate antisocial behaviour, Steve. I think we do have a big problem in this country with it. I would just caution against slow kind of associating it too much with the welfare thing, because I've signed on. I mean, a lot of people have been in that position, particularly after the recession, and it's not pleasant. And you do get, frankly, some job centre staff who talk down to people, and they have a little bit of a power and they abuse that. They sanction people at the drop of a hat. But I totally understand and appreciate where you're coming from. There is definitely a problem out there. I mean, if you have a parent who's not taking any responsibility, clearly that's going to have an influence as well. Excuse me, guys, I'm multitasking here, so I'm trying to get to the comments, but also, bloke I know has been neglecting seeing his kids for the McRib and sadness over Joker 2. Telling the mum to F off and refusing to see them now with the McRib. He won't see them and spends loads. McRib? Sorry, what's that, Thomas? I don't know. Of time at Macus, he's in his 40s. What's your thought on the Oasis reunion? I've no thoughts, Thomas. I wasn't a fan of Oasis. I don't like the Gallagher brothers. I mean, I appreciate some of their music. They had some good songs, but I don't give Liam Gallagher the time of day, especially. I think he's a glorified yob, basically. He's also extremely arrogant. I mean, if I was a fan of Oasis and the person I'm paying good money to go and see basically tells me to stop complaining, I know that they done a performance before the Joshua Dubois boxing match at Wembley, and that was criticised. I just think Gallagher has a pretty obnoxious personality, so I certainly wouldn't spend money to see someone like that. So honestly, I have no strong views on it. I don't know if it's successful or not, but I have no strong views on it. I would say, though, Oasis fans, is the person they're paying money to see respecting them? I don't think so. What's your opinion online predator hunters? Always wondered about that. Well, it's the online thing, and then you get these sort of vigilante paedophile hunter types. I've mixed views. I do understand the frustration when it's perceived that the police aren't sufficiently acting. And we saw that with the grooming gangs across Northern England. So I do get the deep frustration when the police are perceived to be spending more time on hurtful words online than actual crimes. Rightly or wrongly, that is a perception the police have. However, I would be cautious about vigilantism because they can make mistakes. And there is an ethical dilemma regarding entrapment. For example, that American show, To Catch a Predator. Some people have argued it's entrapment because the targets, that is the predators, haven't actually done anything in the sense of they haven't actually carried anything out. And in order to expose them, the producers and so on will try and get them to say something, so they're actually encouraging them to do so. I do think that someone who has that problem who is got predatory instincts is going to do it regardless. But I do think there is a bit of a problem with entrapment, and I don't know what the legal issue is there. A strong lawyer might argue my client was entrapped and he didn't actually do anything he wasn't intending to. But I do think, it would be naive to think that someone who looks at those images isn't maybe going to consider acting on them, which is why I think Hugh Edwards should have got a stiffer sentence than he did. But in terms of vigilantism, I think that, they need to be damn sure that they get the right person, because we've had moral panics in this country. I remember when the little girl Sarah Payne was killed. I don't know if you guys remember this, back in 2002. There was a moral panic then, and a lot of innocent people were falsely targeted. There were idiots actually targeting pediatricians, as if an actual paedophile would advertise it outside their house. But that can be an ugly thing, that sort of mob mentality. So, I abhor what these people do, but what predators do. But I would be a little bit cautious about vigilantes. And my question to them would be, are you absolutely sure that you've got the right person? So it gets into lots of realms like entrapment and that sort of thing. Okay. So I think incels can benefit from having a wise mentor who can help them. Attracting women is the best be all and end all to existence. Yeah, this is the thing. We get back into the thing about alpha male influencers. The problem I have with the likes of Andrew Tate is they're presenting a very fictional narrative of the real world. Like, he's a very confident guy. He's a former MMA fighter. He's rich, etc. But the reality is, for the vast majority of people, they're not going to see that. So I think that, this thing about influence is very important. What sort of male role models do these young men need to have in their lives? There's people that I think they can look up to that are traditional men, if I could put it that way. Because the thing is, feminists have sort of said, I think some radical feminists imply that all masculinity is bad. Well, put it this way, let me make this analogy. September 11th, United 93, it was a plane that famously crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. It's a plane where the passengers fought back. I don't know if you guys know about this, but basically there was three guys, Todd Beamer, let me get their names right, Todd Beamer, Jeffrey Glick, I think the guy was called, and there was a third guy, and they took it on themselves. There were others involved, of course, but they kind of led the effort to basically take on the hijackers themselves. Now, those were traditional guys. Actually, one of them was gay, which is an interesting point, because he was also a rugby player and, a big guy. He wasn't like this kind of stereotype of effeminate gay man. But the point I'm making here is, would feminists say they were exhibiting toxic masculinity? Of course not. They were heroes, along with the other passengers, because their actions probably prevented many more deaths. So I have a problem with the term. Well, I think there is toxic masculinity in yob culture, in gang culture, but masculinity itself should not be stigmatized. Brave values like bravery, toughness, they're good things. That's something that can help us in this world. So I certainly don't like the way feminists sort of stigmatize all masculinity. And I think most women, if they're being honest, want a manly man more than a guy who's just really hypersensitive pushover, if I could put it that way, very bluntly speaking. So I'm trying to keep track with all the comments. Let's see here. When you arrive at a calmer consensus around women, you realize the whole something slayer just comes across as someone projecting their insecurities or need for approval. Yeah, this is the thing, Steve. I don't know if you're touching on this, but the whole problem with the incel subcultures is based on bitterness, and they blame women for the problems. So it's not a case of looking at themselves and thinking, oh, I lack confidence, or I'm not getting the opportunities. And, that is frustrating. I'll say, frankly, myself, when I was at university, there was times I was very, very lonely. I wanted a girlfriend. I didn't get it. Subsequently, I've had quite, average amount of experience. Let's say, I was going to say quite a bit, but let's say an average amount. I've had girlfriends. I have a partner now. But there's definitely a toxic thing there where they blame women. We even had an example in this country, the Plymouth mass shooting a few years ago. Big news because mass shootings are extremely rare, of course, in this country. But that, again, there was an incel thing involved in that. There was a truck attack in Toronto back in 2017. The incel subculture was a thing, and some of the mass shootings in the States have had incel motivations. So this isn't just like a bad attitude to women, it's potentially dangerous. I know Yvette Cooper's spoken about it being potentially treating it on the same level as terrorism. So, but I don't think it's good enough just to condemn incels. I think they need to be shown that it's not all bad. There is still hope. It's this really dystopian gloom outlook they have on the world, I think, is the problem. And influencers aren't helping it by giving them false narratives. So yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Steve, regarding calming down in that sense. But I do empathise with the loneliness. I went through that at university. There's another prominent masculist, Wheat Waffles. I assume that's some sort of stage name or username. His message is different. He represents what's called the black pill, a mindset that dating success is solely determined by physical attractiveness. I think I'm not familiar with him, so I can't comment on this at length, but I do think human nature does look at aesthetic attraction. I will say this might be a little bit controversial, but I think it's absolutely true. People say, oh, it's not the looks that count, it's the personality. Well, I don't want a beautiful woman who has an obnoxious personality, but if she's beautiful, that will be the first thing I see, probably. Okay, because when you sit down for a coffee or a drink and you can get to know the personality, that's great. You either warm to them or you don't. But aesthetic attraction, I mean, sorry, I'm reading into this King of America, the black pill thing, just a mindset that dating success is solely determined by physical attractiveness. I'm not sure if I would make the same conclusion. I think it certainly works initially, but I've seen examples of couples where one partner or both are very good looking people and yet it breaks down. Well, we could look at famous examples, Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. I mean, maybe that's an extreme example because they're, A-list actors, but maybe that's a bad example. But I know from experience that I've had, I mean, my first girlfriend was very beautiful. She could have been a model, but it didn't work out. There was other issues there, but I do think though human nature, people say it's nothing to do with looks. I think most people, if they're being absolutely honest, will look at that. When I was on online dating sites, of course I looked at the photo. Of course I want to see what she looked like. And you know something, guys, this is going to be controversial, but I'm going to say it. There are certain aesthetic qualities I would say, you know what, she might be a nice person. I could maybe be friends with her, but I can't date someone if I'm not attracted to them. So someone who's morbidly obese, for example, it's not, I'm just not going to be attracted to that. And some women might not like red hair like I've got, and that's their right to have that preference. So aesthetic appeal is absolutely valid, I think. But I'm not familiar with the guy, so I can't comment much more about that. Do you think Starter may get forced out of leadership? I think that's meant to be Starmer, Thomas, from his own party within his 4 years. I predict Starmer will be in office for about 5 to 7 years, actually. The reason I'm saying that is because Labour will be really desperate to avoid the leadership transitions that the Tories went through. Within, 6 years, we had Cameron, May, Johnson, Truss, and Sunak within 6, 7 years. So I think Labour will be keen to avoid that sort of constant reshuffling of prime ministers. So Starmer will have his scandals, he'll have his controversies, but as I made in my video about analysing Labour's 100 days in power, I mean, look at, for example, there's numerous issues. There's the winter fuel payment. There's the small boats. There's the early prisoner release. There's the even this thing over Taylor Swift, supposedly with government ministers offering her personal security. All of this is going to be forgotten by the time of the next general election. Or maybe not the small boats, but things like the early release of prisoners. There's going to be debates, as there should be, but I really don't think people in the next general election will, unless they've perhaps been a victim of one of those offenders. I think it's almost like, so I don't see Starmer going anytime soon. He's 62, which nowadays isn't that old. Yeah, I just think Labour will be keen to avoid the sort of problems that the Tories had. So I think he'll be. I'd be surprised if he went in less than 4 years. Put it that way. But I could be wrong. They could have some massive scandal that means that's unavoidable. If Friends gets remade, but they were all devout Muslims, would you watch it? That'd be interesting. Well, I guess it depends how devout. No, I certainly wouldn't watch it. But I might watch it for a laugh, just to see how absurd it would be. I mean, would it be an American setting, or would it be Friends, the Amman version, the Karachi version? You know, it would be. There has been proposals to remake Friends, and I'm skeptical. No doubt they try to make it all diverse, and because again, you know, Friends has been attacked for its lack of diversity, as if Fresh Prince and The Cosby Show were, you know, not predominantly black shows. But yeah, would I watch it? I might watch it out of just pure curiosity, but I can't see it being effective as a show. Let's see here. Do you wonder how the economy is going to do with Labour in charge? Yeah, I mean, that comes down to Miss Reeves, what approaches she takes, and I think that with the economy. I think it always takes time after a previous administration. Let's see. Andrew Tate represents the red pill, which is more about game and self-improvement. Of all figures in the online manosphere, I can't grasp why it's only Tate the media has spotlighted. What do you think? That's a good question. It could be because of all his legal troubles. So that's given him notoriety that perhaps some of the other ones are a little bit more, I don't know, covert. I mean, certainly I don't spend time on the manosphere, so I wouldn't. Honestly, I probably couldn't even name many others. Why has Tate got all the attention? I think it could be because of that reason. And also he's got quite a lot of influence, so could also be that. But you know, some of the things he's come out with, I mean, he's the fact he's a convert to Islam, and then some of that doesn't help the optics because it's a contradictory lifestyle. You know, if he wants to be a devout Muslim, then the lifestyle the guy leads is hardly conducive to piety, put it that way. And the narcissism of the whole world's out to get me whenever he's held to account for. I mean, I believe in due process, but I absolutely do not trust the guy. Let's see, do you think Jeremy Kyle is one of those Tate types? That's an interesting question. I don't like Kyle, but I don't think he's the same as Andrew Tate. I mean, if anything, Kyle was biased towards women because there was one episode, and this might be the only time you hear me defending Jeremy Kyle. There was a woman that was on that was beating her boyfriend, and the audience laughed because Jeremy Kyle's audiences were vile. Kyle, and this is probably the only time I'll ever defend him, he did reprimand the audience. He did say, you know, if this was the other way around, you lot wouldn't be, you know, you wouldn't be supporting it. Of course, Kyle gave them publicity in the first place. That is the only time you'll hear me defend Jeremy Kyle. But no, I don't think he's in the same category as Tate. I think Kyle's more. I think they're both populist in a sense, but it's a different dimension. It's a different, you know, with Jeremy Kyle, he's more in the vein of a more serious Jerry Springer, whereas Tate's more. It's a different domain. I think it's just a different. I mean, they're both controversial figures, but I don't think Kyle is necessarily a Tate type. Kyle's just a populist who's, if anything, he's been accused of bias towards women because he's often those he exposed on the show were men supposedly having cheating on their girlfriends and so on. Let's see. White girl, I know, criticized one of my friends, white, saying that his cannabis consumption is racist. And he needs to learn about culture. I have no words for that. I'm drinking coffee right now, so I guess I'm appropriating Ethiopian culture. This is bullshit. I don't know if you guys heard about the boba tea thing in Canada this week. I made a video about it. The actor Simu Liu, who was born in China but he's a Canadian citizen, made a thing about cultural appropriation. It quite honestly, it pisses me off because it's it represents a sort of exclusiveness, like only one group of people should be allowed to enjoy something, but also it's just hypersensitive. It's just looking for reasons to be offended. And the sad thing there is if what happened in this case was a couple who apparently pitched their idea for improving boba tea. They got this huge online backlash, including death threats. And I remember going to a website, I think it was NBC Asia or something like that. And, all the comments were saying, oh, it's great for Simulu to speak out and represent us Asians. And I was thinking, I got into a thing with some of them. I didn't want to take it further than that, but this guy actually spoke about globalization and inclusiveness and so on. And I pointed out the hypocrisy because I said, if you truly believe in what globalization can offer, then you'll accept that cultures spread around and they're not to be enjoyed by one group. And he actually was talking about racism and discrimination in the same vein as white people making boba tea. It's insane. If he was talking about hate crimes or something, I would get that. But I really don't like the words cultural appropriation the way it's used today. So the girl you mentioned, Steve, I think she needs to get a grip if she's seriously. I mean, I personally wouldn't advocate cannabis. I think it's, not for anything to do with cultural appropriation. I assume she's talking about it being a thing in Jamaican reggae culture. But I wouldn't advocate not for that reason. I just think it's been linked to schizophrenia, and I'm not convinced it's the great wonder drug that it's made out to be. But I'm not an expert. I personally would be cautious. I would caution people against cannabis for the same reason I'd say, well, don't drink too much, don't smoke too much. But but the cultural appropriation thing is absolutely it's tiresome. The last video I made was about hypersensitivity, and I touched on that. And related to that subject, I remember about 8 years ago, there was a young woman somewhere in the Midwest. I think it was Oklahoma or somewhere like that. And she basically, it was her prom night, and she decided that she'd wear a Chinese cheap house style dress, white girl, because she thought it was beautiful. And she got absolutely bullied for that because she was culturally appropriating a Chinese dress, even though Chinese girls would have no issue wearing a Western style dress. But that's the other thing with those who allege cultural appropriation. They're hypocrites because we all do it. So sorry to get on my high horse there, but it does, as you can tell by my voice, it pisses me off that people just read so much into that. I think if you present something as authentic and it's not, that's a different matter. But just hoping things, at least in this country, will stabilise, need some stability after these past few years. I do agree, Declan. That's why I want, as much as I take issue with some of Labour's positions, I don't want to see Starmer reshuffle anytime soon. I don't, I hope Starmer stays Prime Minister for a while. Then the next general election, people can vote for him or not. But I don't want to see a situation where we're changing Prime Minister every couple of years because it will make Britain look weak. It wouldn't be a sign of stability. Crikey, Fred's 1984. Whilst we know it's very unlikely, so chilling and shows how ugly things can get. Yeah, that scene where the nuclear bomb goes off in Sheffield, and you see someone wetting themselves. It's quite powerful stuff for sure. Let's see here. I think if this film was created today, it'd be a lot more CGI animation, which would affect the rawness and realisticness. Yeah, that's the thing. It was probably quite low budget, but it had a sort of earthy quality, which made it even creepier in some ways. especially the bit where they react after the initial device. In fact, you've put me in the mood. I might watch it soon. I've got it on DVD. When I say in the mood, you've made me think about it. On the topic of media coverage or lack thereof, do you know about the things Putin has said attacking Western policies on transgenderism? I assume the reason most media outlets haven't shed light on it is due to the fear it could cause amongst the LGBT community. Well, we had RT in this country up until 2022, and Russia Today was always talking about these sort of culture war issues. I never bought it, and this is why. Russia models itself as sort of this socially conservative society, family values, and all of that. And it may be that way. It may, look at those things more than the West does. But I always saw Russian state media that was an attempt to divide the West by. It wasn't just reporting these things; it was highlighting tensions and trying to, it was like sort of poking a hornet's nest in a way. That's why. So in terms of Putin's record in LGBT stuff, for me, there's some things I don't like. I think pride can be excessive. I don't like the way the transgender lobby bullies women. I do not believe that a biological man can be a woman. I just don't. Legally, they could be a trans woman, but so I can see where Putin can capitalize on that. But having said that, I mean, there's some of the things that go on in Russia. If you're a gay man, you could be beaten to death, and the police will do little about it. Things like that. It's not quite. I have a gay friend, and he has anxiety issues in general. I say, Russia's bad, but Uganda's a lot worse. So Russia's not even the worst place in the world with this issue. But yeah, I certainly think Putin and Russian state media will capitalize the culture wars in the West. And I think a lot of Western conservatives have lapped that up naively, so not realizing it's not really about Putin taking a stance on these issues. It's more about trying to sew up divisions in the West, in my opinion. In other words, people can voice concern about anything to do with transgender issues, but they shouldn't use Russian state media to do so. What's your thoughts on the ideas of VR headset metaverse and the idea that we can be in these worlds controlled by Facebook totally? They want us to socialize work, to see. I really don't know much about the VR headset thing. I just don't know much about that. But in terms of the control social media companies have, there's definitely legitimate concerns. I quite like my VR headset for gaming, but the whole metaverse thing. So, Thomas, I know nothing about gaming. I have to say that right now. I just don't know anything about the subject. Do you ever watch by VHS? Yes, I actually have an old VHS player, and I do occasionally watch old videos. So, yeah. Carl, the thing is that in today's world, things can change quickly. People didn't expect Labour to win in 2024 after the 2019 election. That's very true. But I think Labour itself, ambitious Labour politicians realised so long as Corbyn was at the helm, they were going to stay in opposition. I often wonder, about Corbyn supporters, like, are they so anti-Starmer and anti-Labour centrist that they would rather not be in government at all? Doesn't make any sense. Because Keir Starmer has a bit of the dilemma that Kamala Harris has. In other words, placating the hard left of the party. Both Starmer and Harris are, I would say, broadly centrists, but they have to pitch to their respective so-called progressives in the party, although I would say there's nothing progressive about Corbynism. But, Corbyn may be out of the party, but Corbynism isn't, particularly with Muslim constituents who have strong views on Gaza. So it's a difficult balancing act, I think, for Starmer. Whatever happened to that North Korean sympathizer channel you had a bit of a spat with? Oh, yes. I was thinking about him the other day. I have no idea. I wouldn't even know how to look it up because I can't remember his username, but I remember that young guy named and shamed me in his channel. I don't know if he's grown up and had any introspection. That was quite a few years ago now, and I remember he was a young guy, early 20s. I hope he's grown up a bit and realised how naive he was, but I feel honored that he named me in his channel because I was calling him out for his nonsense. Yeah. Am I a book person? I absolutely am, Carl. I have around 700 books and I'm reading a lot at once. This is just a little sampling of some of the books I'm reading. Just move this slightly. Let's see here. Sorry, the quality is not great, but a lot of political biographies, some fictional stuff. I'll just give one example here because it's difficult to show everything. Don't often read Stephen King, but I'm reading this one. It's kind of about time travel, 2011, 2263. It's about an English teacher who goes back. He has to stop the Kennedy assassination. It's pretty good, pretty easy chapters. I like short chapters, but I am a slow reader. But yeah, absolutely, I'm a book person. Having said that, I actually went to a book group for a while, but they put me off because they took it too seriously, and you had to actually buy the books from Waterstones, which isn't cheap. It's so that put me off in the end. I remember that at the time in his deluded videos. Yeah, I honestly don't know what the deal with that young guy was, if he really, really believed the stuff he was saying, or it was just his way of saying, oh, look at me, look how shocking I am. I honestly don't know if he was genuinely that naive or if he was just trying to be a rebel. I just don't know what it was. Because, of course, we know he would never go there. I wonder, did he hear about Otto Warmbier, the young American guy who ended up in a comatose state and then died back in the United States for allegedly stealing a North Korean flag? You know what, guys? I'm actually going to have to wrap this one up because I was intending to multitask here, and I mean, I appreciate the participation, but I can't really do two things at once. So let's say another 5 minutes and I'll wrap this up. You know what? I'll just sit down here. Be easier. Almost never sit down at this table. Maybe it's about time that I did. Okay, let's give it another 5 minutes. How would you deal with North Korea if you were the US president and you had 4 years to deal with it? That's a good question. The thing is, when Trump went to that summit, I'm very anti-Trump, but at the time I gave him credit. I said, okay, this is diplomacy. Maybe this is a good thing. Maybe there could be an achievement here. But it was very clear that Kim Jong-un just took him for a ride. You know, he's buying time. How do you deal with a hermit kingdom? It's a difficult one because in ideal circumstances, you would use your closest neighbor, China, to weigh some leverage because South Korea is less of a factor because we're allies with South Korea anyway. But relations with China are bad. So how can we get the Chinese to put pressure on them when our relations with China are bad? With lots of reasons. I don't think North Korea poses any threat to the UK. I think even if they develop intercontinental missiles, it's too far away. But definitely there is a regional threat. They could threaten Japan, South Korea, possibly Australia. How would I deal with them? Certainly vocalize on the human rights record. I think that's legitimate. Polarize it, although it's already polarized, so that seems a bit pointless. Probably pressure China to take refugees but then that's something the Chinese will say, oh, we see what's happening in Europe and North America, we won't do it. So it's a good question. I think in the immediate term, I mean, I don't underestimate North Korea. It's a very, very sinister regime. It's a very unstable regime, unstable in the sense of its paranoia. But in the immediate term, I think Iran is probably the bigger threat to world stability. This is not that I support everything Israel does, but I do think Iran is a major, major destabilizing force in the Middle East. So that's probably the more immediate thing. But we have in the world today numerous crises building up. So we have the war in Ukraine. We have the escalations within Israel and Iran. We have the uncertainty of the American election and tensions in the South China Sea. In fact, this year there's been growing tensions between China and the Philippines. So you have all these things building simultaneously. The 2020s feels very much like the 1930s. But then again, we've heard this prophesizing of a third world war for years. Every time there's an international incident, oh, it's a third world war, and that doesn't really transpire. But yeah, what you should see the Iran endgame being, it really depends how much this escalates. So today, apparently, Netanyahu's residence was targeted by Iran. They weren't successful. Obviously, Israel has some of the best security in the world. But I don't know. I mean, the thing with, I was thinking about the assassination of Sinwar and Nasrallah and the others. I certainly don't shed any tears for that. But Israel has to think. I'm not sure if Israel knows what the end game is, because initially, I mean, is it about freeing the hostages? Is it about revenge? Is it about destroying Hamas and Hezbollah as fighting forces? If it's the third option, then to a large extent they've done that. They've taken out their leaders. And of course, Hamas and Hezbollah will replace their leaders. But Nasrallah particularly had a charismatic appeal with Hezbollah supporters. So will they get someone that has the same appeal that he had among Islamists? I don't know. When bin Laden was killed, that did weaken Al Qaeda. So targeted assassinations can have a role. In terms of Iran, I know Trump and other conservatives say that Biden and the Democrats enabled Iran, but it gets into a policy of containment. Does containment work? Does the sanction regime work? There's no easy answers, because the problem with a sanction regime, I think targeted sanctions have a place, but generic sanctions can only end up causing resentment among Iranian people, many of whom hate the Iranian regime. I mean, one thing I have noticed in Iran, every few years there's some sort of angry street protests, most recently over the death of that young woman. I think her name was Mahsa Amini, if I've got that right. Don't quote me on that. But once again, we saw angry street protests, and we saw that regime gun down its own people. The difference is, before it was happening about once a decade, now it's happening every few years. So Iranian protesters are getting braver, and more. There seems to be more of a tendency to take to the streets. I do hope that one day that ghastly, ghastly regime in Tehran can be overthrown and replaced by a more moderate regime. And then there could be hope for proper dialogue with the West. Britain, unlike America, still has diplomatic channels with Iran, which isn't entirely a bad thing, because if we have, for example, British hostages in Iran, we need some sort of diplomatic channel to negotiate the release. But there's no easy answers when it comes to the likes of Iran. I do think, though, it is a massively destabilizing force. In terms of the end game, who knows? I mean, the problem is we have a hardline Israeli government and we have a hardline Iranian government, and neither side's backing down. And every single day this is escalating. I think both sides know that a full-scale war would not be good for anyone, but unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be much de-escalation. Let's see, how long do you think the conflict in the Middle East will last? Maybe another 2,000-3,000 years? But seriously, I mean, when you say the conflict in the Middle East, the problem is the origins are so. It did escalate on October the 7th last year, badly so. But this is an ancient conflict. I'm reading Jimmy Carter's Palestine Peace Not Apartheid. I'll just show you. And it really gives an insight into how former President Jimmy Carter. It's a good book, but he knows what he's talking about. He achieved the Camp David Accords between Egypt and Israel in 1979. The problem is, so long as there's hardliners in power, there will be no hope of peace in that region. So long as you have Hamas with a genocidal intent against the Jewish people, and so long as you have, frankly, racist elements within Israel's government who, allows violent settlers to attack Palestinians, are against any sort of two-state solution, there's going to be, this thing's just going to fester and fester. I mean, I think Israel needs to be very careful, because they can say we're liberating Lebanon, but if someone's had their entire family wiped out by an Israeli airstrike, they're not going to be thanking the Israelis. And yeah, I do see the situation Israel's in. I'm not neutral on this, but one thing we could be sure about, it's not black and white. Hi Nathan, do you think Kamala Harris surprisingly beat Trump in the US presidential election? Well, is it surprising though? Because she's leading in a lot of polls. I was talking earlier about, whether the polls are accurate or not. I've just a bit of a historical anecdote here. In 1948, a lot of papers said that Governor Dewey of New York won the presidential election. They were actually so confident they were saying Dewey wins presidency. Turned out that Harry Truman had won, although he was an unpopular president at that point. Interestingly enough, 70 years later, he's now ranked among the higher ranking American presidents. So, things can be surprising, but I definitely think American politics, every election has tensions. Every election has its moments. There were moments between Clinton and Dole, although that was a pretty civilized election by comparison, between Bush and Clinton in 1992. But there's nothing, in my opinion, like the last couple of years, the last couple of elections. And I do think Trump is a huge part of that. I really think that the problem is if it's close. Let's say, I think either way it's a problem. If Trump wins, he's vowed revenge. Well, what sort of form is that going to take? And I do think he has dictatorial tendencies. If he loses, we know from history that he's a sore loser. So either way, it's a problem. I don't know what's going to happen. A little off topic, but people often describe the US state of Ohio as being the most representative of American culture. I've been doing a lot of research on it myself, given the chaotic state the US is in. King of America, I think you're in. What state are you in? I'm not going to say because I know you mentioned this before, but I'll say the wrong thing. I think you mentioned which state you were in. Yeah, Ohio, I've heard it described as a bellwether state. I know it's Republican now, but it has been Democrat before. Though there's been times, so with some elections where Ohio was to the right of Texas. I'd say it's a pretty conservative state overall. Although I would have thought Ohio has some big cities, Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati. I would have thought they'd lean more Democrat, but cities tend to. But yeah, Ohio's always interesting. It's a big state, 11 million people. I think it ranks about eighth most populous, something like that. So it's definitely an interesting state to look at. I don't know how popular Vance is in his home state, and how much the running mate thing actually matters. Most people said that the Vance Waltz debate made no difference to their opinions. So I don't know. But definitely I agree. Also, I don't know if you know this, King of America, but Ohio's produced several presidents. William McKinley, Warren G. Harding, and I think Rutherford B. Hayes are all Ohioans, and Benjamin Harrison, I believe. So a bit like Virginia, it's a state that produces presidents. Right now, it's a very compelling topic. I think it personally, it's helped me understand how a lot more of how American society works, of course, as well as Ohio is very prominent in the news right now. There may be some truth in that, but America's a huge country. So what is the norm in California is not the norm in Vermont. What's the norm in Vermont is not the norm in Florida, and so on. It's almost difficult for a country as big as America to be easily categorized. But Ohio is in some ways a kind of middle ground state. It is sort of America. That's it. If you had to pick the most average state, it might be Ohio. It's in that sense. I suppose what I'm asking, but I was going to say you could maybe say the same thing about other Midwest states. Maybe the same thing could be said about Illinois or Wisconsin. Wisconsin, I believe, is one of the swing states. Ohio isn't this time around. I think it's Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, if I've got that right. I suppose what I'm asking is this something you consider researching in depth? You mean the Ohio thing? Probably not, because I just don't have the time. I'm very interested in the American election. That's, it takes up a lot of my videos, and I watch a lot of videos. But in terms of actual research, just I don't think I'd have the time, as I'm balancing out a lot of things at the moment. But if you're asking if it's like, if how representative Ohio is, maybe worth a video in its own right. I might consider that. But in terms of research, I just don't have the time to get into, if I was working for a PhD or something, or actually formally in an academic institution, I'd maybe do something like that. But I know enough about it. I know I'd say in many ways, Ohio is sort of, but then Missouri could maybe be described that way as well. any one of those Midwest states, perhaps. I meant the conflict with Israel, Palestine, and Hezbollah. Oh, yeah, you're talking specifically. Well, even there, I mean, even in the Near East with Israel and Palestine, that's an argument that goes back. I mean, the modern conflict began 1947, more specifically with Hezbollah. Hezbollah was founded, I think, in the 80s. Um, how long will it last? I'd love to see a situation where there is optimism in that region, and for once, it's not a byword for war. But right now, like I say, it seems very far off. Because even if Israel prevails militarily, which looks likely, given it's taken out these top commanders, it's pretty much impossible to totally eliminate Hezbollah, Hamas. A, as long as Iran is fueling it, and B, you're going to have enough resentment against Israel to fuel future jihadists. And this is no justification, but if someone's had their entire family wiped out, they're not going to like Israel. That is only going to help that sort of, they say in Northern Ireland, for example, you'll know what I'm talking about, Carl. They say that Bloody Sunday was one of the biggest recruiting tools for the IRA because British soldiers shot dead 14 civilians, and the next day the IRA's membership grew. So, as much as I think terrorism should be tackled, it needs to be done in a sensible way. And Simwar is going to be replaced, Nasrallah is going to be replaced. I just hope whoever replaces him doesn't have the same influence, and maybe they will weaken as a force. I do think with all of this, there's legitimate grounds to criticize Israel, but the West needs to put, to keep pointing out it is Iran that is fueling this, because the Iranian people don't want this. They don't want a war with Israel. So they might, with just some justification, say what Tehran is doing is trying to distract from domestic problems. The polls are neck and neck and could really go either way. Well, that's my point, JX. I mean, there'll be polls that say, oh, Harris is leading in this, or Trump is leading in that, and they're neck and neck. I've got to the point I wouldn't say I don't believe it, but I do question how reliable they are, because, like I say, polls get it wrong. There's been a few people, Nate Silver, I believe, was one, and there's another guy, I forget his name, who have accurately predicted the outcome for each presidential election. I will say this, though. It would be a disgrace if Harris got the popular vote, but she lost because of the Electoral College. I really think the Electoral College is a flawed system. It's fundamentally unfair. The one candidate can theoretically get more votes, but still lose. So if that happens this time around, I do hope there isn't any big uncertainty. I hope it isn't a repeat of 2000 where it drags on for weeks after election day, because that wouldn't be good for anyone. Just taking a breath here. In 2016 2020 polls, Trump was underestimated, but the unpredictability really doesn't favour either candidate. Yeah, I mean, that's the point. In 2016, it was unexpected that Trump would win. Although it has to be said, he won the Electoral College only. He did not win the popular vote. If the basis was the popular vote, Trump would have lost badly, and he lost both in 2020. This time round, this is almost 2024 is almost the most uncertain election ever in modern times, because I believe the Trump cult, as I call it, still has a lot of influence, and Trump has managed to make himself look like a victim. I'm not talking about the assassination attempts. I'm talking about all his legal cases. Perversely, that almost works in his favor. If you look at Democrat sources, they will say Harris is leading. Republican sources will say Trump is leading. And then perhaps independent sources say it's neck and neck. I do think in places like Pennsylvania, it's going to be very close. I just hope that it's a big enough gap so that there isn't enough ground for Trump to kick up a stink. But the problem is, if it is very close and Harris wins, even some non-Trump supporters might say, oh, this is too close to be certain. If it's pretty much guaranteed for Kamala to get the popular vote, whether that will translate to Harris' campaign is still very uncertain. I mean, this is the problem. I think she probably will get the popular vote. I see no reason why she won't, because she's managed to get Republicans over But how will that translate in the electoral college system? I don't know. I guess we'll only know on election night. I mean, this could be actually, there could be a huge Harris victory coming in store. It could be she actually gets a huge victory. And a lot of the uncertainty is just Democrats trying to be cautious and trying not to be complacent. She might actually get a huge victory. And the bigger her victory is, the harder it will be for Trump to push that claim that it's another stolen election. Because if he loses, there's no way he will go out quietly. I do not see Donald Trump. His ego wouldn't allow it. And even if Trump doesn't have the energy for a fight anymore, he is 78 years old, he's almost got himself into a trap where his own supporters will demand that he does that. So he actually has to please his own supporters. So Trump almost can't be in a situation where he would go out graciously like any normal candidate if he loses. And if he wins, I'd like to know what this revenge he keeps talking about will translate as. It's got very uncertain prospects. I mean, how much of Trumpism is hot air and how much will he carry out? The thing is, I think even if there's hot air, even if it's hot air, that's still a problem, because this is potentially the president of the United States, and words matter, I think, when you're a leader. Okay, guys, I will take one more comment, one more question or comment, then I'm going to wrap this up, as I've still a lot of these dishes to do and I want to focus on this. So let's see if we could get anything else. It's been a good live stream, so thank you everyone for the participation. Any more questions, comments? As well, give people a chance before I wrap this up. I hope I've got around to everyone's questions. Apologies if I miss anyone. Okay, what's my opinions on Starmer so far? Check out my video on Labour's first 100 days. But very briefly, I don't hate the man, but as opposition leader, I didn't like some of his positions. I didn't like him taking the knee. I think that was a mistake. Because it allowed him to be set up to be accused of gauging the culture wars. I think that was a mistake. It was misguided. He's certainly better than Corbyn. I mean, the idea of Jeremy Corbyn being prime minister and pandering as he did to this country's enemies is just, in terms of foreign policy, I'm quite happy with Starmer. I think he's got the balance right. He's being consistent with Russia and other areas. Domestically, the early release of prisoners, very controversial. But that was something that the Tories also left on the plate. They did not sort out that problem. One thing I am angry about, James Timpson, the prisons minister, actually said, we punish too many people in this country. Now, that is a contradictory message to Labour claiming to be tough on crime. I like James Timpson to meet victims of antisocial behaviour. So it's a contradictory message to say we're a government that's tough on crime, but then have. And then there's the whole two-tier thing. To be honest, I don't think that's just Starmer. I think that is a problem more widely. Some have said, oh, it's just a far-right conspiracy theory. No, I think there is actually a problem there, because we do see double standards. We see people investigate for non-crime hate incidents, and yet serious crimes getting undermined. We see the police cracking down hard on nationalists, and yet when you see it's them shouting Allahu Akbar, they turn a blind eye. I think the police haven't helped their own case more often than not. Did you get a chance to check out that book I mentioned once called Anti-Intellectualism in American Life by Richard Hofstadter, by the way? I'm afraid I didn't, because to check out a book, I'd need to buy it, really, and money's not on my side. So I appreciate the suggestion, but I didn't get a chance yet. Hey, Nathan, welcome, Zane. I'm afraid we're about to wrap this up, but you know what? I will give 5 more minutes if there's something you want to ask or put out there. Okay, how did I vote at the general election? I voted for Labour, not enthusiastically so, just because the local Labour candidate. I mean, Sunderland's a strong Labour seat, always has been, but I voted for him because he seemed like a decent man. Lewis Atkinson, he's called. You know, his position seemed pretty moderate, centre ground. I mean, time will tell, but I voted for him because some of his opponents weren't really going out of their way to campaign. I actually knew the Liberal Democrat, and I know he's a decent guy as well, but I was disappointed by the lack of communication. That's a thing though. Parties have to work with what they've got, and if they're a small party in a particular seat, they simply don't have the expenditure to put out what the dominant party has. So, you know, I think the public don't realize these things within politics. They don't realize the dynamics that politicians have to deal with. What do you think of pro-Palestinian protesters? I think definitely there's anti-Semitic and pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah elements in there, which are very ugly, and there's absolutely the Islamists among them. Having said that, I don't think that everyone who's concerned about the civilian death toll in Gaza can be described as pro-Hamas. Among those protesters, there will be decent people who just have a concern about the suffering going on. But I would question why there's such a focus on that one conflict when there's other conflicts going on in the world. For example, Sudan. Sudan's one of the biggest humanitarian crises today. Burma. You know, there's numerous other conflicts going on. So what I think of them, I don't like some of the anti-Semitic and pro-terrorist elements within them, but I'm not totally detached from some of the anger and concern they feel about civilian deaths. I'll be voting for Harris in November. That's great. The more votes, the more it adds up. I mean, what I would say to anyone who's uncertain about this, I mean, obviously I'm British. It's not my place to vote or to tell Americans how to. But I would say anyone who's uncertain, voting for Harris doesn't mean you're a Democrat, doesn't mean you're going to the left. It just means that you recognize how awful Trump is. This is a man whose record should speak for itself. He lies. He's tried to subvert democratic results. I think he's actually dangerous. I think Harris was right when she said he's not a serious man, but the threat he represents is. What state are you in, Zane, if you don't mind me asking? Are you in a swing state? Or, I mean, if you have any friends in Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, what's the other ones? Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Michigan, Iowa. Yeah, always the first state to call in primaries, isn't it? Are you in Des Moines, Zane? And if you did do a video on Jim McCalley, as the guy would say to a person with depression to pull yourself together, yeah, he's a piece of shit, in my opinion. I hate Kyle, but what can we do? At least, I mean, it's good the show is gone, but I do resent the fact that Kyle still has a job with Talk TV. But then, you know, Julia Hartley-Brewer has had some obnoxious opinions as well. She's another presenter on that show. When she had a pretty callous attitude to the disabled or unemployed. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up as I need to finish the dishes. Zane, I apologize. I know you've just come here late, but the live stream's been going on for a while. MS 30 minutes north of Des Moines. I don't think Harris will win Iowa, but the number of independent voters is increasing. That's interesting. I mean, I know Iowa's a Republican state. I think it's more Republican. The independents will be important, as they were in 1996, I believe. Ross Perot got a lot of votes, or 1992. But an interesting thing, Robert Kennedy Jr.'s votes can't be translated to Trump in some states. So he is the main independent candidate in this election, but he's just endorsed Trump. The irony is his name cannot be taken off the ballot in some states. So hopefully that will go against the Trump campaign and not against the Harris campaign. When the Trump people say, oh, we got Tulsi Gabbard and Robert Kennedy Jr., well, Gabbard has been against her own party for a long time now. And Robert Kennedy, as far as I know, has been an independent for a long time. So they can't really hold that up as prominent Democrats going to the party. I mean, the rest of the Kennedy family have basically disowned RFK Jr. His father was a great man. I don't think the same about him. I don't give him much time, particularly over his stance on Russia and Ukraine. And as for endorsing Trump, that's just hard to fathom. You know, RFK Sr. would be turning in his grave, I think. Let's see. Iowa, I always watched Iowa in the primaries because, of course, that's the first state to call in the primaries. I knew a guy from Iowa. He was the father, actually, of a young woman I worked with in China, or rather, she sadly died actually of a heart problem out there. But he was a local historian. We kind of lost touch because he was quite, he was quite anti-British in some of his outlooks, and I got a bit tired of that. But he was very left-wing, very Democrat. You're right, people do tend to pick the Israel-Palestinian conflict over others. Maybe it's because they project a political worldview on it. I also think it's because of the unique situation that it's the cross points of three major religions. It is true, though, if you're pretty much guaranteed when there's a conflict between Israel and the Palestinians that you will get, I mean, even last year not last year, but 2021, when there was the last major flare-up, and it was on a much, much smaller scale to the war today. You got celebrities like the Hadid sisters, the models. They were very pro-Palestinian, and then the actress Gal Gadot, who of course is Israeli. Her Instagram was full of pro-Israel posts. So you even had celebrities getting into feuds over it. You just don't see the same thing with Sudan, for example. You don't see huge demos in London or New York City about which general they support in the Sudanese war, or West Africa right now is on fire. The jihadist insurgency that's going on there, it's increased. Thousands have died. I mean, a few weeks ago, 600 people were killed in an Islamist attack in Mali or Burkina Faso. I think it was Burkina Faso. That's staggering. 600 people. If that were to happen in Europe or North America, it would be a massive story, That's just another African conflict. Having said that, sometimes it is down to access to journalists. It's not always journalist preference. I mean, as a journalist, if I was, I say as a journalist, I haven't really got into the industry yet, but if I were to report from a frontline place, I'd say, okay, that I'd want to cover wars that are not covered. Because there's many. There's at least 40 different wars raging in the world today, and at least a dozen of those are considered major wars. If you look online, Wikipedia, ongoing conflicts, it sort of divides it into major wars, that is with thousands of deaths a year, low-level insurgencies, which are an ongoing conflict, but it's not on a very big scale. Yeah, it is very sad, and I agree. There's others, just looking up at the map here, we have, I mean, the Syria war isn't over. That's like, in the 2010s, it was a major, major conflict. It's far from over. Yeah, it's totally in the back shadow of the news now. Where else do we have? I'm just looking up at the map. Yemen. Yemen's another big one. And there's all sorts of low-level insurgencies. Papua New Guinea, there's been sectarian conflict there. Haiti, the drug war there effectively is, the gang warfare is basically the same as a full armed conflict now. 70 people massacred recently. There's a lot of conflicts going on in the world. There was a time when it sort of around the late 2000s or something, it seemed there was an argument that the number of wars was actually reducing and the world was actually more peaceful than it was in the 70s and 80s. Now I would say it's went back to the dark old days. There is a lot of wars going on today. And you get parts of the world that just seem to be cursed. I mean, Ethiopia, as soon as one conflict is settled, another one breaks out. It's a big country. You have the Amhara region. Amhara has had some very deadly violence recently. Yeah, I like Wikipedia too. I've actually, I hardly have money on my side, but I've actually donated to Wikipedia because I do use it a lot. I know it's not foolproof. I know it can't 100% be relied on, but it's convenient, and editors do have to back up their edits with sources. Okay, guys, I'm really going to wrap this up because I need to get the rest of this done. So thanks a lot for the live stream. This has been a good one. This is the sort of live stream I like, where there's a lot of participation. People, leave comments, ask me questions, because I really can't get back to every comment on the videos. I do get quite busy sometimes, so I appreciate this. And until next time, I'll just read this one. I remember Trump saying Haitians were eating cats and dogs. Yeah. Insane. Even if it was taken out of context for a presidential candidate to regurgitate that absolute nonsense. Okay, guys, take care. Until next time, look after yourselves and thank you for your participation. Cheers.